Okay, hello. So it's Wednesday and it is the Breakfast Club. And if you sat there thinking Jacob Trueman's not looking quite so good this week, he's kind of aging rather. Well, don't worry about that because I'm not Jacob Trueman. Jacob Trueman is now, this is the bad news, Jacob Trueman is now a thing of the past. He's got a lot of other projects on, and unfortunately, regrettably, he cannot spare the time to keep filling this slot. That is the bad news. The good news is you only have me for 1 week, and after this week, I will be passing you on to, well, I won't tell you, I'll tell you at the end of the video. Just gives you a reason to keep watching, doesn't it? Now, what I wanted to talk about, a couple of other people have chimed in the meantime, is to talk about this thing that Jacob himself had talked about. You see, I'm going to segue from Jacob onwards there, is to talk about whether it's okay not to like reading. And one of the things that Jacob said was he seems to take so long reading books, whereas some people, they just seem to fly through books. Well, this is what I think, Jacob, is that a lot of people who just seem to fly through books, they're not really reading those books properly. They're just kind of skim reading them, which might work with kind of, if you're reading Barbara Cartland or Jackie Collins or some kind of shite like that. But if you're reading something which is actually worth reading, it probably is not going to work, And I've come across people who say, I've read this, I've done this, blah, blah, blah. And you say, what, properly? And they're like, yeah. And you say, well, I tell you what, I had a few questions about that. And when you ask them, they haven't got the first clue. So what I would suggest is that Jacob stops being so hard on himself. What it probably means is that he's actually reading his books properly. I know I much prefer non-fiction over fiction, and I'll often read a few pages, have to stop, read a bit again, stop, think, work through the ideas that I've been reading about, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because where Jacob says, is it okay not to read books, my position is that, yeah, it's okay not to read books, but you're really missing out. Because just watch, where do you get your information from? Watching a documentary is nowhere near reading a book. If you want to go to a website like Yale do a site called something like Yale Courses, have a look there. They're free, they're gratis, you can just get them and you can watch a whole introductory course to law or to the Old Testament or to philosophy or something like that, like a foundational course of 30 lectures, and it's all free. And obviously if you watch something like that, then that is the equivalent of a book. But what I've learned from reading books is just how much you didn't know and how much that you can know in a couple of 100 pages. But George Orwell said something along the lines of don't use a long word if a little word will do. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. If you're writing a book, there's two reasons to write a book. One is to get your ideas across, and George Orwell was all about these amazing ideas that he had. And if George Orwell had taken the other policy of showing us all how clever he was, I think some of those ideas, those clever ideas, may have been lost. We've all been marvelling about what a great literary giant he was, perhaps, but some of the ideas would have been lost. And on that basis, I want to give you a little review of the one book. It's not the only book that I've failed to read, but it's the only book that I failed to read because I realised that I just do not have the capabilities, I do not have the language base to be able to read it, and it is this. Stephen Jay Gould's The Structure of Evolutionary Theory. I think he spent about 20 years off and on working on this. And it's kind of like the Bible, right? If you look inside it, there's about 1,400 pages. And I always thought if I read that, there's nothing that I'm not going to know, that a layperson could ever want to know about the history of evolutionary theory and about the modern evolutionary synthesis. And you know what? I just failed, and I failed hard. I think I got to about page 250 and I just couldn't take any more. And it wasn't the technical language. It was that Gould, he's kind of known for this, I know, but when it's a book that long, he's so intent on using the most arcane, archaic, contrived, convoluted language that he possibly can, that it's almost like he would rather you marvel at his linguistic skills than be able to read the book. I'll admit, I think I've got a fairly reasonable vocabulary, quite a large gamut of words that are within my scope, within my sort of linguistic purview. I'm doing it there. But the very, very few times did I get through more than 2 or 3 pages without having to pick up a dictionary to look up some term. Not some technical term, mind, but a linguistic term that was just there to make the whole language they use seem more florid, and just make you gasp at the breadth of his vocabulary more than anything else. And I think that the book is a big loser. If his intent was to reward the reader with his vast girth of knowledge of evolutionary theory, then he lost out. If his point of writing that book was to just show off about what a clever bastard he was, that it was probably quite a good book. There aren't many people that I would think that I know that are capable of reading a book like The Structure of Evolutionary Theory. But one person, if I had to pick somebody of the few people that I've known on the internet, would be the person who will be replacing Jacob next week, next Wednesday, and that is David Landon Cole. So on that note, I will sign off, say sayonara or whatever it is that people say, and I'll pass you over to Thursday's host, which I think is Bionic Dance. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.